Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to this episode of the Classroom Matters podcast with me, your host, Kristy Houle, where we dive into the hottest topics in education. And today's guest and today's topic is certainly on the forefront of that. As everyone listening knows, we've had some very traumatic events. Things have transpired over the last several years, the last decade in our schools across the country when we are talking about school shootings, school safety, school safety preparedness, active shooter drills, lockdown drills. And so our students and our parents and our teachers are sometimes inundated with these challenges, which in turn bring a lot of anxiety to those involved for good reason. So today we are talking with Claire Marie, who is an expert in school emergency management. She is also a trauma-informed practices consultant and a former Reserve law enforcement officer. So her work spans across K through 12 school emergency preparedness and management, school safety, and I think the most important thing is prevention systems. Working as a leader in K through 12 school safety and emergency management, Claire often hears about young kids and adults, so we're talking parents and staff here too, who struggle with lockdown drills. The reason we have lockdown drills, what happens after lockdown drills, and all the things that encompass that topic. So in response to this, Claire is also now a published children's book author, and her most recent book, Sammy the Sasquatch, Welcome to Crittertopia, is a lovely, magical, adorable story for children ages 4 to 8, in which she hopes to support adults in lifting the veil of secrecy and silence around practicing lockdown drills with these stories. So Claire, welcome to the show. I'm really excited to dive into this unfortunately traumatic and sad topic, but it's definitely something that needs to be talked about.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here and have this discussion.
So I talked a little bit about some of the amazing things that you've been doing, all the work that you've been involved in, and it's a pretty big scale, right? So you're going from school safety, school preparedness, emergency management, trauma informed, to writing a children's book, which is pretty awesome. So just share with our audience a little bit about your background and some of the work that you've done and really what led you to this writing of this book.
Writing a children's book was never something that I had planned on doing. It came out of me needing a tool to better interact with and work with young kids, especially when it came to discussing lockdown drills and then supporting adults, just the common things that popped up for adults. So, my background, my education is in public health. I had never planned on going into emergency management or safety work, but I have met so many folks whose education is in public health that have ended up in emergency management. And it just makes sense because we're looking at how do we create systems that support well-being, right? Whether it's mental health, physical health. And so building up in my early career, really focusing in trauma-informed care and trauma-informed practices, I ended up working a lot with law enforcement, actually, on a community level. We looked at how do we create trauma-informed communities. And so working with law enforcement, honestly, just fell in love with the work that they do in the sense of they respond when people are in their greatest need, that greatest moment of need. And then how, though, when you're facing that constantly, do we support mental health and wellness in those individuals as well, so that they can present their best self when they come to the call. And so in that work, I actually ended up getting the opportunity to take on school safety and emergency management for a specific region where I live, a 13 county region in K through 12 schools. And we have gone through so much training through FEMA, through the Readiness Emergency Management Center, Technical Assistance Center for schools, really just tons of on-the-job work with Department of Homeland Security, cybersecurity, infrastructure security, site assessments. So it's been just a joy to evolve in this field and really, be able to make a difference for a lot of different systems.
Mm-hmm. So we're talking a little bit about emergency drills in schools, and a lot of times you will hear students and parents and sometimes even staff sort of like blow it off, or it's not that big of a deal, or that's not going to happen, or what. So why is it so important that we do actually put 100% into all of these emergency drills and do them frequently? What's the importance in that?
Well, so wonderful question. When emergencies hit, we don't stay in our thinking brain, in our prefrontal cortex, right? A different part of our brain appropriately takes over. And so if we have not taught and empowered people beforehand the steps that they need to take, the simple steps that they need to take to manage their end of the situation, mitigate any potential negative impacts, and restore a sense of safety, is to drill it, and to drill it over and over again. Especially for little kids, right? Their prefrontal cortex is still developing. So we really have to make sure that we empower them beforehand. And it's important when we think about doing drills, when we teach drills, that a part of that conversation is not just how to do the drill when it comes to staff, but how to do it in a trauma-informed way. And if they are the one that notices something is off, they know how to make that notification to the school at large, right? So their first job is always protect their classroom and the students within their purview, but also how do I notify the rest of the school that something might be a little off right now?
Mm-hmm. So are you talking more about like if there's holes in maybe the procedure, or if something, because I'm thinking about that too as you're talking, right? I'm like, if teachers are having a drill and they notice, okay, well, I didn't expect this. I had 3 kids in the bathroom.
Mm-hmm.
Where do they go?
Yeah.
So are those the types of things that you're talking about with the more that you do drills, the more things like that you're going to pick up on and be able to fix, so that if it really does happen, you know what to do in those situations?
Yes, absolutely. What we want to see that teachers can make the notification. So for example, I support a school, and a teacher whose window looked out onto the playground noticed that a man was hopping over a 6-foot fence. That's not a normal thing, right? That's not what we see every single day. So the teacher appropriately said, we should go into lockdown because something weird is happening. And so that teacher thankfully knew how to notify the rest of the school that it was time to go into lockdown, right? And so sometimes folks think like, oh, the principal is going to tell us, or the front office secretary is going to make the notification, when they might not be the one that sees it needs to happen. And so we need to make sure folks know how to do the notification, that the class knows the simple steps that they need to do to keep themselves safe. So, right, this is class management at the teacher level, which then allows the administration to manage the emergency at the larger school building level. And then anytime you are doing drills, call out the learnings that you're talking about, right? So, oh my gosh, I had students in the hallway. I had students, in the bathroom. We were at recess for the first time when we did this drill, and we didn't know what to do. So making sure, yes, that you are using those learning opportunities to improve your process.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay, so because I have a lot more questions based on what you just said, but before I hit those questions, because I know we're using a lot of words, right? We're saying active shooter drills, we're saying lockdown drills, we're saying emergency drills, and those things all mean different things. And I know even, in my children's school right now, they will have a soft lockdown, they'll have a this lockdown. And I'm sure that both teachers and parents are like, what are they talking about? So could you just sort of go over, the difference between emergency, which could be any weather emergency, I'm assuming, emergency drills, weather-related drills, lockdown drills, and active shooter drills?
Yes, absolutely. So let's see here. We'll start with schools can use whatever language they prefer. We really encourage you to align language across a region. And so depending on the size of your region and how your community safety personnel, so law enforcement, fire, EMS, 911 dispatch, depending on how they cover that region, that will inform how to align your language. For the regions I support, it's usually on a county-wide level. So we'll want to see language across a county aligned. And what that means is when 911 dispatch calls a school and says, we recommend you go into secure, that is known regardless of what the school they call across that region. So we recommend whatever language you end up deciding to use, just try to align that if you can, because communication, collaboration, and coordination are the first things that go out the door when an emergency happens, and they're also the most important. So front load that. And then within that, I would say we recommend, and we don't benefit in any way if you use them. And in fact, it's free. So it's wonderful stuff. It's evidence-based. We recommend utilizing the I Love You Guys Foundation work. So the I Love You Guys has what's called the Standard Response Protocol, often referred to as the SRP. And there are 5 key functions or actions that you take within the SRP, and you can use them essentially as Legos. So you plug and play what you need in response to whatever might be occurring. So the 5 actions, there's hold. A hold means that just remain where you're at. If you're in a hallway, clear out of a hallway just to the closest location. You're not locking any doors or anything like that. You're just clearing the hallways. Most likely what has occurred is some type of medical situation or potentially a large spill that needs to be cleaned up. So we're wanting to protect someone's, privacy if perhaps they've fainted or they've had a diabetic episode, and allow EMS to get there, emergency medical services to get there, and just keep things calm for that person. So a hold is one of the actions that you might take. Evacuation, which folks often use most commonly, right, with a fire drill they'll call. So you're practicing the function of evacuation, which you're going to have to evacuate in response to many different threats or hazards. So we have hold, evacuate, we have shelter in place, which could be many different things depending on where you live. Where I live, the shelter action that would be most common is earthquake, so drop, cover, and hold. You could shelter in response to a chemical hazard, a tornado. So there's lots of different actual actions you could carry out in response to the shelter in place function. And then we have secure, which for a lot of schools is sometimes soft lockdown. Sometimes they've referred to it as lockout. We encourage folks to steer away from using repetitive terms in your actions, right? Because our prefrontal cortex is offline. So I have had classrooms that have heard the term lock, and it was a lockout, but they went into lockdown because all they heard was lock, and you went stress activated right away, which is totally understandable. So not necessarily carrying out the proper level of function, still safe, but more safe than we need to be. And so secure is just where you secure the external perimeter of the school. And really that's making sure that all the external doors are locked, which we recommend you have that anyways, but go around and double check those. And then if you have, if you move between buildings for your school and you head outside, you wouldn't transition initially in a secure. As you gather more information on what's occurring, you could do an escort between buildings for class transitions. The most common reason that you would go into a secure is if 911 dispatch calls you and says, hey, there's some law enforcement activity kind of near the school. Yeah. We recommend you go into secure. And then the last one, of course, is lockdown, and that's lock sights out of sight. So you want to get behind a locked door in what we would call the hard corner. We do not call it that with children because that's kind of a weird, scary term, but into the hard corner, and then you're quiet. Lockdown is most often associated with active threat or active shooter. But just because a school has gone into lockdown does not, in fact, mean that there is an active threat or an active shooter. It is a Lego that you have decided to put into play because something about the day is different than what we would normally expect and a little bit concerning. And we need to have someone whose job it is to check on safety, go and make contact with somebody. So in the case of the person who hopped the fence at that school, was a local construction worker who really had to go to the bathroom and used the porta potty on campus. So when law enforcement contacted that person, right, they're not actually a threat to the school. They shouldn't be on campus and they shouldn't hop a fence. But there was no active threat. But the school, the teacher was beautiful response, exactly what needed to happen. So lockdown, again, associated with active shooter, but doing a lockdown drill is not an active shooter drill. An active shooter drill is absolutely something that schools should allow and should support their local law enforcement to do, because what happens is they become familiar with your school building, with moving through your school building and clearing rooms. And we want to have that in place. And it helps build that relationship between law enforcement and the school. But that should never be done with children on campus. Should never be done with children near campus. It should never be required of staff to engage in those, but there's nothing wrong with allowing staff to volunteer to be a part of an active shooter drill. Again, though, never a requirement. Some adults find a benefit in that and learn from it, and that's wonderful. And some adults want no exposure to it whatsoever. But super important that we do those, and never with children.
Yeah. And I know, years ago, I can remember that being a big controversy where schools were doing these active shooter drills with students in the building, and it was somewhat traumatizing, and it just put more fear. And I can see you right now sort of cringing at just the thought. And I totally get that, and as you were talking about community, because you mentioned there about involving community and having the communication and the collaboration and all those things. So I'm assuming that it's really important to practice that and to really communicate with your parents about what you just said. I think this is really, really important for our listeners to hear and to know. What you just said about if you are in a lockdown, it doesn't necessarily mean that there is, you are in imminent danger of an active shooter. It could be a number of things. But what happens in a lockdown is that students who now have cell phones are texting and calling, and they're not even sure if there's even a threat there. And then you have a slew of parents arriving at the school. And so I would imagine, how do schools communicate before this, right? Like just in communication about procedures and process of when they have these incidents where they may have to go into a lockdown, but it may not necessarily be a thing where you have to come up to the school. So talk a little bit about why that communication with parents and community is so important to keep those disruptive things from happening.
Yes, absolutely. So I'm going to make a few points here. So what we want to see a school do at the beginning of the school year, right? There's tons of information that goes home to parents. We know you can email things out, but through as many communication channels as possible in all languages that your school serves, front load as much as you can. So send out to parents of the school, to families, a list. What are the terms that your school uses? And what is the action that's being carried out in association with that term? And why might that be happening, right? Yes, it could be an active shooter. Statistically speaking, it's highly unlikely. That doesn't make anyone feel better, understandably, right? Because active shooter is horrific. But children will co-regulate with the adults that they're communicating with the adults that are around them. So it is the job of the classroom staff to help students remain calm, because students are going to, understandably, our brains, right? When we go into that survival mode, we're going to think, what if it's this? What if it's that? What do I need to do? And that's an appropriate response if there is something in front of you that you can do something about, right? If there's a bear right there, if the bear is a mile away, it's not really helping us right now. And so students will co-regulate with the adults around them. So if they're communicating with parents, what we want to see is that parents help them remain calm. So biggest thing is don't show up. Do not come to the school if the school is in lockdown. For a really important reason, you are taking up space on the road. People that are trying to get there are law enforcement, fire, EMS. Because we don't know when someone goes into lockdown, the assumption is that there is an active threat. That's why we've gone into lockdown, right? Yes, we're making that assumption because we don't know what's going on. So the best thing that we can do is create as much safety as possible. We go into that action. That doesn't mean that there is a true threat. So we're acting on the available information. We're making sure that we can create as safe a situation as possible and creating time. What you are doing is buying time for law enforcement to get there and to do their job, and they're really good at it. So if parents are on the roads and law enforcement is also trying to get to the school to help your students, that's going to be a problem because they have to slow down because you're in the way. So do not go to the school. You're not going to get in. And in fact, if there is an emergency situation that's occurring at the school, you may not be picking your kid up from the school. So stay where you're at and wait for communication from the school. The schools will, through whatever methods they can, a lot of them have push notification systems that go directly to text. Usually 911 can do something like a reverse Everbridge. I'm not sure if that's the same method that's used everywhere. That's what's common in the areas that I serve, where they can push out a message to a certain region. So there's different methods of communication. So keep an eye on social media. That's going to be a common one, school website, those sorts of things. Make sure you're signed up for the emergency push notifications at your children's schools. And the schools will communicate out when they're able to, right? You know, we're in lockdown. Please don't show up to the school. We'll update you as we have more information. Then they will update as they have more information. So just stay where you're at. Don't go to the school. Frontline information, and then communicate through the process.
Yeah. And I think a lot of parents just being in that situation, the first thing that they want to do is call the school office, right? You can tell. You've seen this a lot. I can tell by just your facial. You're like, yes, because that's just your instinct, right? Your child calls you or they text you, because everybody has a phone now. Every kid in the school, even though we've got all these cell phone rules, kids still have their cell phones. I have three, teenagers, and they always have their cell phones on at school when they're not supposed to, because that's what kids do. And they're texting mom and saying, we're in lockdown. And then what does mom do? They call the school. And now talk about the congestion of that happening when you've got 100 parents trying to call the school.
Yes. So the school can't give you information as far as like into details, because they're also in an information gathering stage. And they can only give you accurate information. So they're going to have identify a PIO. Ideally, they've trained in the incident command system. So we recommend all schools train in the incident command system. Only information will only come from the PIO. They may, honestly, the best thing that they can do is put on a recorded message and stick that on their line that people are calling. So recorded message, stick it on there. If you can't do that, type up a script and set up a call center. Hopefully, if you have that capacity, you may have to lean on your Education Service Association or ESD Education Service District to help set up, or even your district office, just depending on the size of your school district, to set up a call center that can field those coming in. But don't call the school. Do not call 911 dispatch to ask what's going on. Okay. They are doing their job and you are taking up phone lines. The other reason that we want to discourage a lot of texting, I understand you want to reach out to your kids. I so understand that. But the reason we want to try to keep that low is because you are taking up cell lines. Okay. If we have all of these people converging, what we want to do is keep communication channels clear for law enforcement and the first responders to do their job. So just try to take a breath and remember that most of these incidents are resolved in 5 minutes and almost all are resolved in less than 10.
When you talk about parents preparing their child for lockdown drills, talk a little bit about how teachers and parents can help prepare students, especially anxious students. And does this communication piece that we're talking about play a role in that training?
It is so important that we have these conversations in the home. I think what maybe we don't realize is we teach kids all the time different ways to be safe. They do stuff every single day. Lockdown really stands out because it is often in our brains attached to the concept of active shooter, which is horrific. We don't want that to ever happen. So I understand that. But what we need to do is bring the conversation back to the different ways that kids practice being safe every day, because that normalizes the fact that you do practice being safe every day. And so you can have conversations around what is one thing you do every day to be safe, and I'll say, I put on my seatbelt when I get in the car and I look both ways before I cross the road. And kids get really excited at the classroom level when they can start volunteering ideas, right? They're like, oh, like don't run with scissors. And we don't hit.
Do they still tell kids that don't run with scissors? That's an old one.
Yeah. And stop, drop, and roll, which I thought was going to be so much more common when I learned it. I think it's like 4 or 5, I just assumed like people caught on fire. Thankfully that's not a common occurrence. I've never had to use it. So have the conversation at home, start it with you practice being safe all day long. This empowers them. It helps them understand that they are able to keep themselves safe because they know not to run out in front of cars, right? Really important. So they can do these things. And then if they have been in school, they've likely at least done fire drills. And so you can ask them about, well, how do I do a fire drill in your classroom? So they can, again, show you that they are intelligent, empowered, can do this thing, and can keep themselves safe. They will match your emotions, right? So you need to be the calm grounding force. They will come back to that with you. If their brains get attached on any rumination, which they might when they think about, the fact that there are hazards out there in the world, your job is to recognize that, to see that emotion and mirror it, and then to help bring them back to, you are so good at keeping yourself safe, aren't you? Remember that time you fell on your bike and you bonked your head, but you had your helmet on? Oh my gosh, I was so proud of you that you wore your helmet, and it's okay. We're going to fall sometimes. So our job is to bring them back. So that's a lot of what parents can do. As far as schools and students, communicate with the family before you do a lockdown drill. Some schools do, some schools don't. Tell them what you're going to do. what you're not going to do, because so often, right, parents understandably think that you are going to do an active shooter drill. That's not what we're doing. Okay. And so make sure you address that. You don't have to tell them the date that you're going to do it. You can tell them the date, sometime on this day, we're going to do a drill. We'll give the kids a heads up. Some folks, will give the exact time. We like a crawl, walk, run approach, so there's nothing wrong with telling them at 10:15 on Monday, we're going to have a lockdown drill. And then the next time you do a drill, you could say sometime between 8 a.m. and 12 p.m. today, we're going to do a lockdown drill. And so what that does is it gives them that heads up. It's not real, because sometimes what kids will think is, oh my gosh, they say it's just a drill, because they'll say on the announcement, this is a drill. Please say that. And then the kids will think, no, it's not really a drill. So by prepping them beforehand, then they're more likely to believe you. This is a drill. We're just testing the system. You got this. And then, the goal there is to test, can they hear? Because in a lot of schools, especially older schools, the PA system doesn't work well in all rooms. And so we want to make sure that the PA system can be heard. So communicate with the families beforehand, communicate with the students beforehand, and then debrief it at the classroom level. How'd that go for you? You all did so well. You want to have law enforcement and fire EMS involved in the process. We encourage that. Of course, that's up to each school. They can come in and test if doors are locked. I want to be clear. Do not jiggle the door handle. Okay. That sounds terrifying to the person on the other side of the door. You can very lightly, without creating any sound, just slowly see if that door is locked. Okay. We don't need to jiggle it, because sometimes they do. And I'm just like, come on now. So have them involved, and you can even evolve up to having them release the kids. And so if you do that, knock on the door, this is local law enforcement, state who they are. Everybody's safe. This is a drill. I'm going to come in now. You all did so good. I didn't hear anything. I'm going to go ahead and have you give yourself a hug just like this. And we're going to take a walk to the gym. Or you can have them hold hands. It just depends, right, on the COVID regulations and how comfortable people are. So there are different ways that we can build that up. And then as far as communication, if you're able to front load that as the school, right, if you can send out a brochure that says, here's all the stuff we do around safety, here are the actions that your kids are going to be taught, here's why we might use those. Have a section on communication in an emergency. Here's how you're going to get information for us. Here's what we ask you do and don't do. Mm-hmm. And so that's an opportunity to have that discussion with your kids about, what, I'm so glad that if ever you felt like you were unsafe, that the first person you want to talk to is me. But what I really want you to do is just take a breath and know that I'm here with you. I am paying attention to what's going on, but I want you to listen to your teacher. And I want you to know that they're going to give you an opportunity. And what we encourage schools to do is in small groups, if the kids have phones, say, all right, you 5 right here, text your parents. Here's what you can say. We're in a lockdown. I'm safe. I'll talk to you again soon. Right. And then we're going to have another group of students do a message. So we're able to get that communication out. We're hopefully not overwhelming the communication systems. And we're kind of, helping folks to just take a breath.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I want to sort of piggyback on that and talk about some of the resources once we're doing the drills, before the drills, after the drills, because you've done a really great job on sort of going through all of those things. So tell us about your one resource, because I know you have other resources, but first I want to talk about your book, Sammy the Sasquatch, Welcome to Crittertopia, and just sort of give us the thought behind it, the characters, how you came up with this, like what made you, want to write this book, and sort of the success that you're seeing it have already, even though it was just published a month ago.
The story really came out of, I go into schools and I support lockdown drills, and I was just struggling in the classroom, trying to make it a more trauma-informed approach, especially for the littles, right? Mm-hmm. We don't talk to kindergartners the same way we talk to 10th graders. So I was struggling. I needed a tool. And so I just started kind of coming up with this little story, and I just had it typed up in a little paragraph. And, I eventually found an illustrator, because I was like, one of the things that we want to make sure we give different outlets for kids while they're learning something. And so we had a little line image of Sammy drawn so that the kids could color her while the teacher's reading the story to them. So got that little outlet. They can kind of make the character their own with however they want to color her. So I just started using this in classrooms, and we were just getting such phenomenal response to the story. And the kids really prompted me to write more of it, because they would ask questions like, well, what else is in Crittertopia? And I'd have to make it up on the fly.
Yeah.
I don't know. They're like, are there unicorns? I was like, sure. And that's how Mystery Island was born. And so really, Sammy, we just kind of, wrote herself. But there are a few other children's books out there that look at lockdown, and I wouldn't say anything negative about them. They just weren't filling the need that I had, in the sense that all feelings are valid, but I don't want to show a kid crying or in fear in a children's book, and especially they have not been introduced to lockdown before. If they naturally on their own have a little bit of anxiety and fear, that's totally valid, but I'm not going to put that out there for them to like, oh, should I be scared of this? Like, that kid's crying. So I didn't want that anywhere in my book. And I really wanted it to clearly say, locks, lights, out of sight. And then the other thing that this book has that I haven't seen in any others is there's 4 pages of support information for parents and caring adults on how to have these conversations, because that is what I encountered. I have the law enforcement background. So many of my friends have this background as well, or they're, first responders, they're 911 dispatchers. And so we're steeped in that world, but a lot of the, community is not. And so they're not familiar necessarily with the steps that we take, why we do that, and how to have these conversations. And so I wanted to provide that support information for folks, because I understand why we might, not have that conversation. We're afraid we're opening Pandora's box, but the challenge is that there is this kind of rumbling, right, that the kids are aware of, young kids, around specifically active shooter, which, yes, that's the function you would use as lockdown if that was potential, what was occurring on campus. But the kids are aware of it, and then we don't talk to them. And so they sit in secrecy and silence. And that's when it's hardest, when we are afraid and we are alone. And so, I get why we might stick our head in the sand, but I'm going to encourage us that we pull our head out of the sand and know that you can have this conversation. You really can. And it will help kids to feel better.
Well, yeah. And the book is really great. Like you said, and I totally agree with you on, I've seen a few of the other books out there, and the same, they serve a different purpose. But I just felt like this story, it was a joy to read, and it did make me feel as though we were making it okay. It's okay that you're a little anxious or that you might be a little nervous, but you still need to understand what to do, and it can still be, a learning experience, as opposed to this traumatic, I'm so scared. And like you said, in some other books, kids are crying and everyone's afraid. And, because we do have to prepare them, not only for traumatic situations that could happen in a school system, but honestly, I think that book can apply to so many other areas and not just a school, right? Because that's what I loved about it, was the Crittertopia. And as soon as I opened it, and I'm not going to give away too much about the book, because I want everybody to go out and buy a bunch of copies for their classroom. It's this great map of this Crittertopia and all these cool places and like all these little stores, and it's just so darling, but it gets the point across. So, we were talking before how teachers could use this for so many other things. Like, they could literally teach about maps and directions, and by looking at Crittertopia at the big, those big illustrations, be like, how do you get to, this area, and how do you get over here across the bridge to this area, and how do you go through the bushes and get to this area? So it's really great. So congratulations on the book.
Thank you.
And I hope that we see more things, like that come out from you, because it really is necessary. And so tell us about other resources that you have to offer schools, parents, teachers, students, when we're talking about, being prepared for lockdowns and school safety.
Yeah, so we've got the book, as you mentioned. We also have an activity book that we're working on that should be ready by the fall. A 20-page activity book that'll go along with Sammy the Sasquatch, Welcome to Crittertopia. And then we also can come in and do consultation as far as contracting with schools to provide support. We can do one-off consultations. We can also help you create more trauma-informed emergency drills if you need support in that. Or we can come in and do what we call a Sammy and Friends Train the Coach. When we go into classrooms, we call it coaching. And so what I really want to do is empower schools to do this on their own. And so we can come in and do a train the coach and help support schools to build up the skill set within their staff, so that their staff can then go into the classrooms and support the teachers to have these conversations, because we go into classrooms, we spend 25 minutes, which is a lot of time sometimes for a kindergarten. We make it very engaging, and we really create choice and empowerment throughout the process. We ask before we come in the room, like, hey, y'all, we're here to talk with you about safety today. Is it okay if we come hang out for a little bit? They say yes, right? And so we're building choice throughout this process. They show us because they get the information beforehand. They get Sammy's story. I bring a little Sammy doll. You can see her up there. And actually,
I see her now. Oh, it's so cute. Yeah.
And she's got her vest. She's got her pigtail. So we actually, part of that package is we leave Sammy dolls with all the new coaches. But we come in, and when we walk in the classroom, oh my gosh, it's wonderful. The kids are like, Sammy, oh my gosh, you all know Sammy? How cool is that? What's she really good at? And then they'll tell me. And so we have this wonderful conversation. Sammy and I model for them how they would do a lockdown, and they just practice being quiet. And it's an opportunity, because we bring law enforcement along, to go in the hallway and model, and they'll knock on the door, and we tell them that they're going to knock, and they're going to try to get us to laugh. And our job is to not giggle. And then they'll say funny things like, oh my gosh, y'all, there is a herd of giraffes out here, and they're bringing you cupcakes. So they'll say funny things. And then we invite them. And by the time we invite them, we tell them they don't have to, but oh my gosh, they're all like, yeah, we want to practice. I'm like, okay, let's do this. So it's just about, how do you set up the environment, right? And we don't build fear into it.
Yeah. And I want to add on to that, something that you and I talked about earlier, since you've mentioned that, bringing law enforcement officers into the school on more occasions than when it's just something bad has happened, or you need them to respond to, something that is traumatic. Because unfortunately, we've gotten to a place where a lot of folks have a negative view of law enforcement officers, law enforcement agencies. And so how can schools and teachers and parents normalize and project a much more positive view of law enforcement officers being in the school all the time?
Yeah, it's a great question. So, first, what we don't want is, we don't want you handing out your business card in the midst of an emergency, right? We want trust, communication, coordination, collaboration built between schools and community safety personnel, all of them, fire, EMS, and law enforcement, before an emergency happens. We also want to see more community policing, which is where law enforcement is out in the community, as you said, not when bad things are happening. They're out in the community making connection, helping to teach, helping to educate, support. And so that's one of the things that we do, is we try to take advantage of needing to do a lockdown drill and utilizing that as an opportunity to build that community policing relationship. We want kids to see that law enforcement don't always just have to show up when something bad happens. We do also understand that there may be, for some kids, that might be a stressful experience. So we always tell parents and the classroom and the kids, before we come in, we're going to bring someone, a police officer with us too, and they're going to be in uniform. And so they're able to be aware of that, and they can build any extra supports for kids who might be a little dysregulated by their presence. What I also want to note is that this is an opportunity for stress inoculation. And so I know that what parents want is, right, we don't ever want our kids to be stressed or overwhelmed or anything like that. The stress occurs on a continuum, is experienced on a continuum. We need to create and support children to develop and be resilient. That means that we need to expose them to healthy levels of stress, not toxic levels of stress. And so bringing in someone in uniform is a bit of a stress inoculation against seeing someone in uniform, so that if you see them in a stressful situation, like, oh, that's Officer Jones. Okay, I've seen Officer Jones before. He was really nice to me. He came in and talked to our classroom. I trust Officer Jones. And so it just creates that opportunity to build that relationship outside of bad situations. And that's really important.
Yeah. Well, Claire, thank you so much. I just want to give another plug for the book, Sammy the Sasquatch, Welcome to Crittertopia. Please tell our audience where they can find you, where they can find a copy of the book, and how they can get in touch with you if they want to sort of connect with you on more resources.
Yeah, so you can find us at sammyandfriends.com. You can also find us at Welcome to Crittertopia on Instagram and Sammy and Friends, the ampersand sign on Facebook. And then if they want to get into contact with me, there's a contact us option on the sammyandfriends.com webpage. And then you can purchase the book. I love if you have a local bookstore, even if they don't carry it on the shelf, you can walk into your local bookstore and ask them to order it, and they can order it for you. And then they get the profits from that, which I think is great. If you don't have a local bookstore or you're not able to get in there, you can get it off of Amazon and off of Barnes and Noble as well.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you so much for being here and spending your time. I know this is sometimes a difficult topic to talk about, with adults and children for sure. So I really applaud the work that you're doing. I know it's difficult and probably very stressful for you. So hopefully you're taking care of yourself as well as you taking care of everybody else. But really, thank you so much. It's been a great conversation.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been fun.
Yeah. And don't forget to check out this episode of the Classroom Matters podcast and all of our other great episodes of the Classroom Matters podcast on the Educate.Today website and everywhere else you find your podcast. This is Kristy Houle signing out. We'll see you later.